stop. Your money is not leaving because you are careless with it. The Arcturian Protocol Keepers have already mapped your financial field, and what they are reading right now is not a pattern of poor decisions. It is a structural leak, a fissure running through the energetic architecture of your wealth field, older than your current lifetime, older than your conscious memory of money, and it has been quietly bleeding every incoming resource before it could ever fully land. By the end of this transmission, you will understand exactly why your financial flow has been blocked, what hidden pattern has been draining your abundance, and what the Arcturian Protocol Keepers already know about this phase. But here is the first revelation. The money you keep losing is not disappearing randomly. It is draining through a specific ancestral fracture in your wealth field, one that was never sealed, one that has been silently open across generations, and one that your effort alone was never designed to close. What you have called bad luck is not luck. What you have called your financial ceiling is not a ceiling. It is a leak point. And the Arcturian Protocol Keepers are not here tonight to motivate you. They are here to seal it. This is a live financial field recognition. The algorithm only delivered this message. It did not create the timing. Your material field drew this transmission forward because the fissure has already surfaced enough to be sealed. That is not a coincidence. That is structural readiness. Like this transmission, if you know your struggle with money is deeper than bad luck. Comment 777 if you feel an old scarcity pattern is already being exposed. Share this with someone who works hard but never seems to keep what they earn. You were guided here because the pattern is already active. What you felt when you heard those words is not coincidence. That recognition, the sudden stillness, the way something in your body acknowledged the truth before your mind could organize a response, that is not an emotional reaction to a video. That is the moment your financial field makes contact with its own diagnosis. It is the body knowing before the intellect catches up. It is the part of you that has been living inside this pattern for years, wordlessly, exhaustedly, finally encountering language that matches the exact shape of what it has been carrying. The Arcturian Protocol Keepers do not speak to people who have not already reached the threshold where the pattern becomes readable. They do not send transmissions into fields that are not yet ready to receive them. You are here because the fracture has surfaced, and what surfaces can be sealed. So let us begin with the first thing that needs to be named. You have been told, directly or indirectly, that your financial situation is the result of your choices, your spending, your discipline, your mindset, your ambition, your education, your environment, and perhaps you have accepted some version of that explanation because there was no other language available, because the alternative, that something structural and hidden was operating beneath all your effort, had no vocabulary attached to it, so you kept trying harder. You kept adjusting, you kept reading the books, taking the courses, making the budgets, changing the habits, searching for the variable you must have missed. And still the pattern returned. Still the money left. Still the moment of near stability dissolved before it could hold its shape. Still the floor you thought you had built turned out to be temporary ground. This is the first revelation the Arcturian Protocol Keepers bring through this transmission. What you have been experiencing is not the result of a single correctable mistake. It is not a knowledge gap. It is not a discipline failure. It is the visible surface of a hidden financial field distortion that has been operating beneath the level where ordinary adjustment can reach it. And it has been active in your material life far longer than you have been aware of it. Longer, in fact, than your own lifetime. That is the part that the standard explanations for financial struggle will never reach, because they all begin at the surface, and this distortion does not live at the surface. Here is how it shows itself. Money arrives, sometimes in exactly the right amount, at exactly the right moment, as if the universe briefly aligned to give you what you needed. And then, before it can settle, before it can become security or momentum, or the quiet relief of knowing you are finally stable, something opens beneath it, an unexpected expense that could not have been predicted. a sudden repair that consumes the margin, a loss that seems entirely disconnected from any decision you made, a drain that cannot be fully explained by the ordinary logic of income and expenditure. The money moves through your hands rather than remaining in them. It passes through the way water passes through cupped palms, with a crack along the lifeline. And no matter how carefully you position your hands, no matter how deliberately you try to hold what arrives, the result keeps returning to the same familiar place, not completely empty, but never full, never stable, never consolidated enough to become actual foundation. Always, almost, and never quite. That is not bad luck arranged randomly across time. That is a pattern with edges and depth, and a consistent direction of flow. Patterns have structure. Structures have origin points. And the origin point of this one is almost never where the viewer thinks to look. It is not in this year's decisions. It is not in this decade's choices. It runs deeper than that. What you are feeling right now is not ordinary frustration. It is the moment your system stops pretending this pattern is just bad luck. If this transmission put language around a financial struggle you have been carrying in silence, Arcturian Wealth Scan, the gold frequency audit, was created for this exact stage. It is not another promise of abundance. It is a direct audit of the hidden pattern affecting your material field, so you can begin to see whether the drain is rooted in inherited scarcity, guilt around wealth, energetic rejection, or an older financial instruction still shaping your results. The link is in the first pinned comment, but it will not remain there forever. The Arcturian reading of financial distortion does not begin with your bank account. It does not begin with your credit score, your savings rate, your investment choices, or any other measurement the material world uses to evaluate financial health. It begins with the field your wealth is trying to move through. It begins with the invisible architecture that determines whether incoming abundance can land and consolidate, or whether it will be redirected toward the exit before it can become foundation. And that field was not built entirely by you. It was shaped by every person in your lineage who survived by shrinking, who equated safety with scarcity, who learned that wanting more was dangerous or shameful or selfish, who carried debt like a permanent weather condition, who carried shame around money so deeply it became ambient, who gave everything away and called it virtue, who worked themselves to exhaustion and called it dignity, who told themselves and their children that this is simply how life is for people like us. Those people loved you in the ways they could. Their sacrifices were real, their struggles were genuine. But the instructions they left encoded in the energetic field, the unspoken contracts around what abundance means, the survival codes that linked smallness to safety and wanting to danger, the subconscious equations that made scarcity feel like moral correctness. Those instructions did not dissolve when they passed. They did not disappear with the generation that formed them. They remained written into the field, passed forward not through conversation, but through atmosphere, through the emotional texture of kitchens, where money was always tight and the subject of it always tense, through the inherited nervous system response that tightens when a bill arrives, through the deep, wordless instruction that says, more than enough is not available here, has never been available here, and is not meant for people who come from where we come from. This is the first recognition the protocol keepers want you to sit with, not as a concept, but as a lived material truth. The pattern that keeps draining your abundance is almost certainly not entirely yours. You inherited the leak. You did not create it. It was handed to you the way eye color is handed forward, without consent, without ceremony, without anyone intending harm. And you have been trying, with genuine effort and genuine intention, to fill a vessel with a fracture already built into its base, pouring water in at the top, and wondering with growing desperation why the level never rises, why the water never stays, why the floor of the vessel never holds what you pour into it. Now notice what happens in your body when money begins to increase, not in theory, not as a hypothetical, in actual lived experience, in the specific moments when financial good news arrives, when a payment lands, when a project succeeds beyond what you expected, when a salary increase is confirmed, or a contract is signed, or the account balance reflects something that looks for a moment like progress, do you feel pure relief? Or do you feel something else moving underneath the relief? A subtle contraction, a waiting for what will undo it, a bracing, low and quiet, like the body already preparing for the correction it knows is coming. A deep, persistent discomfort that has no rational explanation but arrives precisely when the financial news is good, precisely when the number should feel safe, precisely when you should be able to simply exhale. That sensation is not generalized anxiety, it is not pessimism, it is not ingratitude. It is the older instruction becoming activated by proximity to the threshold it was written to protect. It is the inherited poverty code, the survival architecture of a lineage that learned to live small, sensing that the system is approaching a boundary it was designed never to cross. And so it responds, not through conscious sabotage, not through deliberate self-destruction. It responds by generating circumstances, by amplifying urgencies, by surfacing needs and emergencies and invisible urgings that quietly redirect the flow of resources back to the level the old instruction considers safe. Not through anything mystical acting from outside you, through the architecture of a field that was never reprogrammed, through a nervous system still running survival calculations, written by people who never knew that abundance was a safe place to live. The Arcturian Protocol Keepers call this the guilt threshold. And the naming of it matters, because what looks like a financial ceiling from where you are standing is not actually a ceiling at all. It is a guilt line. It is the point at which the inherited code activates its correction sequence, the point at which the field begins to pull incoming wealth back through the fracture, because allowing it to remain would violate an instruction older than your awareness of it. And until that line is identified precisely, until it is read at the level of the field where it actually operates, rather than managed at the surface where its symptoms appear, every attempt at genuine financial progress will reach it, encounter its invisible resistance, stall, and reverse. Not because you failed, not because you are not trying hard enough, because the old instruction has not yet been seen for what it is, because it has been governing from below, the level where ordinary effort and intention reach. There is another dimension of this distortion that rarely receives its own language, and it lives specifically in the relationship between your sense of self and the concept of deserving. Somewhere in your lineage, across the generations that shaped the field you inherited, the idea formed that receiving more than enough was morally suspect, that wealth beyond the level of mere survival implied that something was being extracted from someone less fortunate. That comfort made you less trustworthy, less humble, less virtuous than those who struggled visibly. That abundance was not a natural resting state of a healthy material field, but a deviation, an exception, something that happened to other kinds of people in other kinds of families, and not without consequence. These are not conclusions you reasoned your way to. They were not formed by your own assessment of the world. They arrived in you through family language and generational story, through the emotional atmosphere of the home that shaped your earliest understanding of what money means and what it does to people who have it, through the unspoken tension that materialized whenever money was discussed, desired, or openly wanted by someone who was supposed to know better. And they have been quietly filtering your material results ever since, not by making you lazy. You are not lazy. The exhaustion you carry is proof of how hard you have worked, not by making you irresponsible. You have been trying with the full weight of your effort. They have been filtering your results by making wealth feel fundamentally incompatible with the version of yourself you were taught to be, by creating a low, persistent field-level friction between who you are and what abundance requires you to become in order to receive it fully. The Arcturians read this as a field-level incompatibility pattern. The human being is genuinely oriented toward financial stability. The desire is real. The effort is real. The capacity exists, but the field they are operating through still holds an older instruction, still carries the encoded weight of a lineage that learned to associate smallness with safety and more with danger. And that instruction still says wealth and security are not the same territory. Wealth and identity are not compatible here. More than enough is not what people like you hold. And so the field, faithfully executing its oldest governing instruction, sorts incoming abundance toward the exit before it can consolidate into anything lasting. Not consciously, not deliberately, but with a precision and consistency that looks from the outside, from the vantage point of years of trying and watching and hoping and losing. Exactly like bad luck, repeated without reason across the full span of your financial life. This is what creates the specific quality of financial exhaustion that no one seems to have the right language for. The sense that you cannot trust a financial win even while it is happening, the way celebration always arrives already contaminated by the anticipation of its reversal. The inability to let stability feel safe even in the moments when it briefly appears. The weariness of working at full capacity and remaining year after year in essentially the same material position. The quiet, corrosive desperation of watching people who do not seem to work harder than you hold wealth that simply will not stay in your hands, no matter how tightly or how wisely you try to hold it. None of that is personal failure wearing a disguise. None of it is a character flaw that persistence will eventually correct. All of it is the symptom map of a field still operating under an instruction written before you had a voice in what you are allowed to carry. The Arcturian Protocol Keepers have mapped this with precision across many field types, many distortion signatures, many variations of the same core structural failure, and across all of them, they identify what they call retention failure as the most consistent and most misread marker of inherited financial distortion. Retention failure is not the inability to earn. Many people carrying this distortion earn well, sometimes very well, in cycles. The failure is not at the point of income, it is at the point of holding. Money moves in. The field receives it briefly, and then the field, unable to retain what exceeds its encoded capacity, begins returning it to the world through whatever exits are available: emergency expenses, unexpected losses, gradual leakage through accumulated small drains, the collapse of financial arrangements that seemed solid, the disappearance of momentum at precisely the moment it should have compounded, not because the person is incompetent, not because the strategy was wrong, but because the holding architecture itself was never built to accumulate. It was built to sustain the minimum, to keep the household functional at the threshold of survival, without crossing into the territory the old instruction identified as excess. Because excess, in the encoding, was never a neutral word, it was a warning, and the field learned to treat incoming abundance beyond a certain threshold as something to be corrected rather than retained. And so the system performs with complete fidelity exactly what it was built to do. It sustains the minimum. It allows enough to arrive to preserve hope and maintain function, but consistently redirects what exceeds the encoded limit before it can consolidate into security, into savings, into the kind of material foundation that changes the inherited trajectory. It creates the perpetual cycle of almost enough, almost stable, almost there, the horizon that moves as you approach it, the breakthrough that dissolves at the moment of arrival. The person inside that system continues to assume that the variable they are missing is something they are doing wrong, something they have not yet thought of, some discipline or knowledge or strategy that will finally make the difference, rather than recognizing that the governing variable exists at a level below where any of those adjustments can reach. Now there is a third layer, and this one is more subtle than the first two, but it may carry the most consequential recognition this transmission delivers. It concerns what happens to people who begin to understand this pattern at the level of conscious awareness, but find that material reality does not shift in response to the understanding. They hear the language, they recognize the signs with a clarity that feels like finally being seen. They feel the truth of what is being described resonate in the body the same way it did at the beginning of this transmission. and then they return to their financial life and find the same pattern operating, sometimes with what feels like increased intensity, as though naming the pattern has stirred it into greater activity rather than diminishing it. And this is the point where many people conclude that the framework is wrong, or that they are personally exempt from its corrective potential, or that understanding and changing are not as connected as the transmission implied. This is not failure. It is progress misread at the worst possible moment. The Arcturian Protocol Keepers are precise about this. When a long-standing financial field distortion is first seen clearly, it does not dissolve immediately in response to recognition. The distortion has structural integrity. It has held its shape across generations. It will not release its hold simply because awareness arrives. What happens first, consistently, is an amplification. The field, now being asked to change a governing instruction it has maintained for a very long time, responds by running that instruction harder before it begins to let it go. And so the person who has just reached genuine recognition, the person who is closest to actual recalibration, encounters precisely at that moment a surge of financial pressure, more urgency, more drain, more of the exact symptoms that the transmission identified as belonging to the distortion. And the timing of that surge, arriving immediately after the recognition, makes it feel like confirmation that nothing is actually changing, but that reading is inverted. The intensification is not proof of permanent limitation. It is the final active expression of an instruction that is losing its structural hold. It is the fracture becoming fully legible at the surface of the material field, which is not a deterioration. It is the precondition for sealing. What cannot be seen cannot be sealed. What has risen to the surface can be. The pressure increase is the pattern announcing itself with enough clarity to be addressed at the level where it actually lives. And if that moment is understood correctly, rather than misread as collapse, it becomes the most important threshold the viewer has crossed. You are not here watching your financial life come apart. You are here watching an old instruction use its last available leverage before releasing a hold it has maintained across more years than you have been alive. What the Arcturian Protocol Keepers bring forward in this final movement of the transmission is the recognition that the phase you are currently in is not what it appears to be from inside it. It does not feel like proximity to change. It feels like more of the same, perhaps heavier, perhaps more urgent, perhaps more exhausting than it has felt before. But the Protocol Keepers do not read fields from inside the pressure they generate. They read them from the position of structural pattern recognition. And what they are reading in the field of every person this transmission reached is not a field collapsing further into distortion. It is a field in the specific, identifiable phase that directly precedes a structural shift, when that shift is approached with understanding of what is actually operating, rather than continued effort applied at the surface. The drain increasing is the instruction losing its foundational grip. The pressure rising is the pattern having been exposed to recognition, and recognition, in the Arcturian reading of material fields, is the necessary precondition for genuine release. Not the sufficient condition, but the necessary first one. Without seeing what is operating, it cannot be addressed. With seeing it, addressing becomes possible in a way it was not before. You are not broken. You are not handed a defective version of the human capacity for financial stability. Your field has been receiving and faithfully executing an old instruction written by people who were themselves surviving inside a distortion they did not have language for, who passed it forward not through malice, but through the simple mechanics of how encoded field instructions transmit across generations. And you have been living inside the consequences of that transmission without knowing what to call it, without a framework that could hold the full shape of what was actually happening, without the language that would have told you where to look. That language is now present. This recognition is now active. The pattern is at the surface. The fracture is legible. And the timing of this specific transmission reaching your field at this specific moment is not an accident of algorithmic delivery. It is structural readiness expressing itself through the only channels it has available in the material world. The old scarcity line, does not define what you are allowed to hold. Say that aloud if it feels true. Let your own voice carry it into the air of the room you are sitting in, because the field hears what you declare inside it. And the declaration that the old instruction no longer governs is the beginning of the architecture that can hold something different. Before you scroll, leave one sign in the comments that this pattern has already touched your financial life. It could be money that never stays, sudden drains, repeated setbacks, guilt when things begin to improve, or the feeling that stability always slips away. Name it clearly. If this transmission recognizes something you have been carrying in silence, share it with someone who works hard but still feels trapped in an invisible cycle of lack. And if you are ready to understand the pattern instead of blaming yourself, subscribe to Arcturian Gold Codex. You are not watching this by accident. You are recognizing a pattern already in motion, and this is only the beginning.